My parents defended my brother even after he burned down my business. So I sold their home and made sure he lost everything. Alright, Reddit. My family ambushed me with a request to make my restaurant co-owned by my unemployed brother. When I said no, my dad threw his drink at me and yelled, "Watch your tone. You're not going to disrespect me in front of this family." That was the day I cut ties for good, but of course, they weren't done. Here's how it went down. I'm 30 male. I've been working in finance for the past 8 years. I live in a modest house on the south side of Kansas City that I bought with my own money. $400,000 for a decent place. I earned every dollar through years of 60-hour weeks and careful budgeting. Growing up, the dynamic in our house was crystal clear. Blake, 26, male, was the golden child, and I was just there. 4 years younger than me, Blake could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Got a D in math? The teacher has it out for him. Quit his third job in 6 months? The work environment wasn't supportive. Meanwhile, I lived under constant scrutiny. You need to be more mature. Set a better example. That's what older brothers do. I heard that so much I could recite it in my sleep. The thing is, I didn't get used to it because it felt okay. I got used to it because I learned early on that the less I expected from my parents, the less disappointed I'd be. It was survival. My high school years were particularly rough. While Blake was showered with praise for making JV basketball, my parents skipped my academic decathlon state finals where I placed second. Someone had to take Blake to his game, was the explanation I got when I came home with the silver medal. The medal ended up in my desk drawer, never mentioned again. For college, I worked 2 jobs to pay my own tuition at Missouri State, while Blake got a free ride to Mizzou courtesy of my parents. They even bought him a new Civic as a graduation gift. Me? I got a firm handshake and a "we expect great things from you" speech. Only one person in that house ever made me feel seen: my grandfather. He wasn't affectionate or emotional, but he showed love in ways that mattered. Whenever I visited, there'd be a cup of black coffee waiting for me. "A kid like you doesn't need sweets. You need to stay sharp," he'd say. When my computer died during my first job and I couldn't afford to replace it, a small amount of money appeared in my account the next day. When I called to thank him, he just said, "It's from my savings. Not much, but enough so you don't have to struggle alone." He never made it a big deal, never mentioned it again, but I never forgot it. My grandfather was a World War II vet, who worked as a machinist for 40 years, hard as nails, but fair. He taught me to change my own oil, fix a leaky faucet, and invest wisely. "Don't ever rely on anyone else to build your life," he'd tell me while we worked on his ancient Chevy in the garage. He came to every one of my graduations, high school, college, and even my finance certification ceremony. Each time he'd slip me a card with a $100 bill and a note that just said, "Proud of you." Short, simple, but it meant everything. 2 years ago, my grandfather passed away. I lost the only person in my family who ever valued me for who I was. About a month after the funeral, we gathered at Attorney Gavin's office for the reading of the will. My grandfather had divided everything meticulously. $200,000 each for Blake and me. $100,000 each for my parents. The house my parents and Blake lived in would be co-owned 50-50 by Blake and me. The attorney explained my grandfather's reasoning plainly. Because your parents have always shown favoritism toward Blake, he could not trust them to manage the estate fairly. He feared that if he left everything in their hands, Rowan would end up with nothing. The look on my parents' faces was something to behold. My mother's mouth literally hung open, while my father's face turned an impressive shade of crimson. Blake just stared at his shoes, unable to meet anyone's eyes. It turned out my grandfather had sold his own house for $600,000 a few months before he died. That's where the money came from. He'd planned everything carefully to ensure I wouldn't be screwed over after he was gone. I transferred that $200,000 into my account and knew immediately what I wanted to do with it. Working in finance taught me that money sitting idle loses value fast. So I decided to open a restaurant. Not out of some passion for cooking, but because I saw it as a solid investment that could generate steady income if managed properly. I did my homework, spending 3 months researching the Kansas City restaurant scene. I identified a gap in the market for upscale comfort food in the Crossroads district. The location had decent foot traffic, manageable rent, and was close enough to the business district to attract the lunch crowd. I spent about $180,000 launching the business. I hired an experienced chef named Marcel, who I'd met through a client. He was amazing, trained in New Orleans, and had worked at some high-end places before wanting something smaller where he could have more creative control. The restaurant became his kitchen and my business venture. I didn't quit my day job. I still worked my finance gig while hiring a manager I trusted to handle front-of-house operations. The restaurant opened a month later, and I invited everyone, including my parents and Blake. I thought maybe they'd finally be proud of what I'd accomplished. The place was already getting positive reviews locally, and we were booked solid for the first 2 weekends. Instead, right in the middle of the celebration, my mom leaned over and said, "You should have partnered with Blake on this. He's always wanted to own a restaurant." Just like that, like my achievement was somehow a missed opportunity for my brother. Blake spent the entire opening night behaving like he owned the place, criticizing the menu to Marcel's face, telling the waitstaff how to do their jobs, and loudly proclaiming to guests that he was consulting on the business side of things. I smiled and said nothing. I was used to it. The first 6 months were brutal. I was working my finance job from 7 to 4, then heading straight to the restaurant until midnight. Weekends were entirely spent at the restaurant, handling everything from supplier issues to staffing problems. I didn't take a day off for almost 4 months. But it was worth it. By month 8, we had regular customers, solid reviews on all platforms, and even got featured in the local paper as one of the top 10 new restaurants to try in KC. The business was turning a profit sooner than I'd projected, and I was building something I could actually be proud of. While I was building a business, Blake was busy blowing through his inheritance, partying, VIP tables, rented sports cars. The works. He burned through $200,000 in less than a year. I found out through friends and social media posts, pictures of him popping bottles at clubs, captions bragging about the high life. His Instagram became a catalog of poor financial decisions. One week, he'd post about his new $5,000 watch. The next, it was a weekend trip to Vegas where he crushed the tables. The week after that, he was posing in front of a rented Lamborghini, pretending it was his. What made it worse was discovering that he'd been telling everyone the restaurant was a family business. He even brought potential business partners to dinner and introduced himself as the owner. Marcel told me about it later, said Blake had handed out his personal card to suppliers, claiming he handled all the purchasing decisions. One night, my bar manager pulled me aside and showed me a credit card receipt with a $700 tab that Blake had tried to comp as owner expenses. When confronted, Blake just shrugged and said, "What's the big deal? We're family, the money all stays in the same pot." Then he got his girlfriend pregnant. The girl, Camila, apparently thought Blake was some successful business owner. That's what he told her. Reality hit her hard when she realized he was unemployed and broke. But that didn't stop Blake from his entitled behavior. If anything, the pregnancy made him more desperate to get his hands on my business. That's when the real family drama started, with me somehow at the center of it. About a year ago, my mom called me on a Saturday morning, asking me to come over for an important family gathering. When I arrived, the house was packed with about 20 relatives, mostly from my mom's side. The setup was obvious. They were staging an intervention, but not the kind you'd expect. The living room had been rearranged to face the sofa, where 2 empty seats waited, one for me presumably, and one next to my mother. The rest of the family sat in a semicircle, like some kind of tribunal. My father stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, watching me with that same disapproving stare I'd grown up with. Among the familiar faces, I noticed 2 unfamiliar guys sitting on either side of Blake, his best friend Troy, a guy with a shaved head and sleeve tattoos who'd been in and out of jail for petty theft, and my cousin Jake, who I hadn't seen in years. Apparently, he'd been crashing at my parents' place for months. 10 minutes, and my mom stood up and announced that Camila was 3 months pregnant. They were planning a wedding for next month. Everyone applauded while I muttered a quick congratulations to Blake. The fake smiles around the room told me what was coming before my mother even said it. Aunt Debbie kept glancing between Blake and me with this expectant look. Uncle Tim was nervously checking his watch. My cousin Karen, who I hadn't seen in 3 years, suddenly looked deeply invested in family affairs. But my mom wasn't done. She stood again, this time turning directly to me. "Our family is about to welcome a new member. Blake and Camila are starting a new journey. But I understand that beginning a family isn't easy, especially since Blake still doesn't have a stable job." Then she looked me straight in the eye and dropped the bomb. "Rowan, I know you've worked hard. I'm truly proud of everything you've accomplished. But today, I want you to think bigger. Think about your brother. Think about the child you're about to have in your life. And there it was. I think you should make Blake a co-owner of your restaurant. After all, he needs a steady income, and family businesses should stay in the family. He deserves an equal share without having to put in any money. I could hear relatives nodding in agreement. One even said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's right. Rowan's the older brother. He should take care of his own." The room felt like it was closing in. They weren't just waiting for my answer, they expected me to say yes, like it was already decided. I sat there for a full minute, staring at my glass. Then I looked up at my mother and said, "Are you serious? That restaurant is something I built with everything I had. I put $180,000 into it. I work 80-hour weeks managing it, and now you're telling me I should just hand over half to Blake for nothing? I'm never going to agree to that." She fired back immediately, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Rowan, your brother is unemployed and about to become a father. We're family. It wouldn't even affect you to share. You're being completely selfish. Can you let your nephew be born without anyone caring for him?" I stood up, not caring about the relatives watching. "Then, where's the $200,000 he inherited from Grandpa?" Blake jumped in with a rehearsed answer, his voice slick with practiced innocence. "I invested it with a friend, but the deal fell through, and I lost everything." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're lying. You spent it all partying for the past year. Don't think I didn't know. Should I show everyone the pictures of you throwing money around at strip clubs or the receipts from the 3 motorcycles you bought and crashed?" Blake immediately lowered his head, but not before I caught the flash of hatred in his eyes. Troy leaned over and whispered something to him while glaring at me. Before anyone could cut in, I turned to my parents. "I'm not making him co-owner of my restaurant. I built that business through my own hard work while he was busy pissing away his inheritance. If you want it badly, give me $200,000 for his half. I'll make him a partner. You can do whatever you want, give it to Blake, give it to his kid, I don't care." That's when my father jumped up, grabbed his drink and threw it in my face. "Watch your tone. I'm still your father, and you're not going to disrespect me in front of this family." The room went dead silent. Aunt Debbie gasped, Karen covered her mouth, and even Blake looked shocked. I wiped my face with my sleeve, calmly grabbed my coat, and walked to the door. "Thanks for reminding me where I stand in this family," I said, looking at each of them one last time before walking out. I drove home in silence. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from various family members, some apologizing, others doubling down on why I should help Blake. I ignored them all. For 2 weeks after that family gathering, I got non-stop calls and texts from my parents. My mom alternated between guilt trips, "I didn't raise you to be so selfish," and fake sweetness. "We're just trying to help your brother start a family." My dad was more direct, "You owe this to your brother." I blocked their numbers after the first week, but they started showing up at my house and the restaurant. One night, Blake and Troy came in during dinner service and made a scene, telling customers that I was stealing from my own family and that the restaurant should rightfully be half his. I had to have them escorted out. The staff started getting nervous. My host quit after Blake showed up one night and threatened to have her fired once he took over. 2 servers requested different schedules to avoid his visits. Marcel stood his ground, but I could tell the constant drama was wearing on him. I consulted with a lawyer about getting a restraining order, but was told that without direct threats of violence, it would be difficult to enforce. The best they could offer was a cease and desist letter, which I had delivered to my parents' house. 3 days later, my mother showed up at my office building, creating such a scene in the lobby that security had to escort her out. My boss called me in that afternoon to express concerns about personal issues affecting my professional environment. I assured him it wouldn't happen again, but I could tell my reputation had taken a hit. About a week before the fire, things escalated. I was doing inventory in the back office when Marcel burst in. Blake's out front arguing with the hostess. He's demanding to be seated at a reserved table. I headed out and found Blake, high as a kite, getting in the face of our 22-year-old hostess. "Get out," I said. "You're not welcome here anymore." "Screw you," he slurred. "This should be my place. Dad was right about you. You've always been a selfish piece of trash." I kept my voice level. "You need to leave now, or I'm calling the cops." That's when he lunged at me. We crashed into a table, sending glasses and plates shattering across the floor. Customers scrambled away as we struggled. Blake was high but still managed to land a solid punch to my jaw. I wrestled him to the floor, pinning his arms. "You think you're better than me?" he spat. "You always have. But I'll show you. You'll see what happens when you mess with me." Security pulled us apart. As they dragged him out, Blake shouted, "If I can't have it, you won't either. You hear me?" I filed a police report that night, documenting the assault and the threat. The officers took statements from witnesses but explained that without more evidence of an actual plan to commit arson, they could only charge him with simple assault and trespassing. Blake was released on bail the next morning. Things went quiet after that. A full week passed with no sign of Blake, no calls, no threats, no appearances. I started to think maybe he'd backed off after seeing the police report. Maybe he'd finally realized he couldn't intimidate me into giving him what he wanted. I should have known better. The restaurant suffered immediate consequences. Several reservations canceled after hearing about the fight. Yelp reviews mentioning the uncomfortable family drama started appearing. I had to hire a security guard to stand at the entrance during business hours, an expense I hadn't budgeted for. 9 days later, at around 2 a.m., I got a frantic call from Marcel. "The restaurant's on fire. I just got a call from the security company. The fire department is there now." I threw on clothes and raced across town, running every red light. From 3 blocks away, I could see the orange glow against the night sky. By the time I reached the scene, the street was blocked off with fire trucks, their lights flashing across the faces of gathered onlookers. I rushed over to find my restaurant engulfed in flames. The firefighters were doing their best, but it was clear the damage would be extensive. I stood there watching everything I'd built burn to the ground. The fire chief approached me as dawn broke. "We've got it contained, but I'm sorry to say there's not much left inside." Any idea how it might have started? I told him about Blake's threat, the police report. "I can't prove it was him," I said, "but I know it was." The next morning, I gave a statement to the police and the fire investigators, mentioning my suspicions, including Blake's threat and the fight at the restaurant. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Detective Reynolds, took detailed notes about the recent family conflict. "We'll investigate thoroughly," she said, "but arson cases are complex and can take several months to build. We need to establish not just that it was arson, but who did it beyond a reasonable doubt." After leaving the police station, I called Blake. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey bro, what's up?" His voice was casual, like we were just catching up. "You know exactly what's up." "No idea what you're talking about." I could practically hear the smirk through the phone. "The restaurant burned down last night." A pause. "That's terrible. Insurance cover it?" "Cut the crap, Blake. I was home all night." "Ask Troy. He crashed on my couch." Another pause. "Maybe it was electrical. Those old buildings, you know. Wiring goes bad. You're going to regret this." He chuckled. "Regret what? Being home asleep while your investment went up in smoke? Good luck proving otherwise." I hung up, knowing 2 things. He definitely did it, and he thought he was untouchable. That would be his mistake. The fire investigation team took samples from the scene, analyzed burn patterns, and collected evidence. 3 weeks later, they officially classified it as arson. Someone had broken in through the back door and used an accelerant in multiple locations. The security cameras had been disabled, but they missed one, a new camera Marcel had installed in the kitchen to monitor food deliveries. The footage wasn't great, but it showed 2 men. One looked like Blake, and the other resembled Troy. They were methodically pouring something on the floors and counters before lighting a match. However, their faces weren't clear enough for a positive ID. I spent the next few weeks dealing with insurance adjusters, comforting displaced employees, and fielding constant questions from suppliers and customers. The financial impact was severe. While I had insurance, there was a significant deductible, and business interruption coverage only went so far. For the next 3 months, the investigation continued. I contacted Detective Reynolds weekly, sometimes daily. They were tracking cell phone tower data, interviewing potential witnesses, and building a case methodically. My insurance company sent their own investigators too, requiring extensive documentation since arson cases automatically trigger fraud reviews. About 2 months into the investigation, my parents showed up at my house unannounced. It was a Sunday morning, and I was reviewing documents for the insurance company. I opened the door to find them standing there, looking like they hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk about Blake," my mother said, pushing past me into the living room. My father followed, his face grim. "The police came to our house yesterday with questions about Blake's whereabouts the night of the fire. I closed the door and stood with my arms crossed. What do you want me to do about that? My mother's voice cracked. They're treating him like some kind of criminal. He might have made a mistake, Rowan, but he's still your brother. A mistake? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He burned down my business. He destroyed the livelihoods of everyone who worked there. That's not a mistake. That's a felony. My father stepped forward. Son, we're asking you to drop the charges. Tell the police you don't want to pursue this. Blake is facing serious prison time. Good, I said flatly. He should be. My mother started crying. How can you be so cold? We're your family. Don't you care what this is doing to us? Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. I can barely sleep. And whose fault is that? I asked. Blake did this, not me. My father shouted, if you had just helped him when he needed it. Stop right there, I cut him off. Don't you dare put this on me. Blake is an adult who made his own choices, and so are you. You enabled his behavior his entire life, and now you're surprised when he burns down a building because he didn't get what he wanted? My mother grabbed my arm. Please, Rowan. If you ever loved this family, you'll help your brother now. He has a child on the way. Do you want your niece or nephew growing up with their father in prison? I pulled away from her. Blake should have thought about that before he committed arson. You've always been jealous of him, my father said, his voice cold. This is your chance to finally destroy him, isn't it? I walked to the door and held it open. I think you should leave. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you, my mother said as they walked out. He didn't raise you to turn your back on family. No, I replied. He raised me to stand up for myself, something you never taught me. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall for a long time. Their visit confirmed what I already knew. They would always choose Blake over me, no matter what he did. In their eyes, I was the bad guy for not sacrificing myself to save him from consequences. 4 months after the fire, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The owner of a gas station 2 blocks from the restaurant came forward with crystal-clear security footage. Blake and Troy had purchased 2 gas cans and filled them an hour before the fire, both clearly visible, both using credit cards with their names. When the police executed search warrants at their residences, they found Blake's text messages outlining the plan: if I can't have half the restaurant, neither can he. They also recovered clothing with traces of accelerant that matched what was used in the fire. The district attorney's office filed formal charges, and Blake and Troy were arrested nearly 5 months after the fire. The charges included second-degree arson, conspiracy, criminal mischief, and insurance fraud. Troy immediately started negotiating a plea deal to testify against Blake in exchange for reduced charges. I was at work when Detective Reynolds called to tell me they were in custody. Blake was finally going to face consequences. The day after Blake's arrest, I drove to the county jail where they were holding him. I needed to see his face. When they brought him into the visitor's room, he looked like garbage, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, wearing an orange jumpsuit. But the first thing he did was smile at me. "Come to bail me out, big brother," he said, leaning back in his chair. I just stared at him. Why? The restaurant wasn't just my business. It was the livelihood of 26 people who worked there. He leaned forward, the smile disappearing. Because you're a selfish jerk who's always had everything handed to him. You think you're so much better than me? I almost laughed. Handed to me? I worked for everything I have. You're the one who's had everything handed to him his entire life. Screw you, he spat. You could have made me partner. 1 signature. That's all it would have taken. But no, you had to keep it all for yourself. It was mine to keep, I said quietly. I built it with my own money, my own work. And now it's gone. He said, that smile returning. How's that feel, knowing I took it from you? I stood up. You'll be in prison for years, Blake. Was it worth it? His smile faltered. Mom and Dad will get me out. They always do. I turned to leave. Not this time. After seeing Blake, I met with attorney Gavin about the house my grandfather had left to Blake and me. It was time to act on that front too. What are my options for the property I co-own with Blake? I asked after explaining the situation. Gavin reviewed the will again. Since you and Blake co-own the property, you have the right to force a partition sale. Given Blake's current legal troubles, this is an opportune time. Your parents have no legal claim to remain there if both owners want to sell. And how quickly can we move on this? I asked, already knowing my decision. I can file the petition today, Gavin said. Given the circumstances, we could potentially expedite the process. Your parents will likely contest it, but with Blake's legal situation, they don't have much ground to stand on. Do it, I said. And the criminal case? That's handled by the district attorney's office, Gavin explained. As the victim, you'll be asked to provide testimony and evidence, but the state is prosecuting the case. My advice is to fully cooperate with the prosecutors. Make sure they understand the impact this crime had on you and your employees. Over the next several months, I did exactly that. I provided the prosecutors with everything they needed: financial records showing my investment in the restaurant, employee payroll information to demonstrate the livelihoods affected, and detailed accounts of Blake's threats and previous behavior. I even created a comprehensive timeline of events leading up to the fire, including screenshots of Blake's social media posts, showing his spending sprees, records of his disruptions at the restaurant, and witness statements from employees he'd harassed. Meanwhile, the wheels of justice turned slowly. Blake's case wouldn't go to trial for nearly a year. His attorney filed motion after motion for delays, claiming they needed more time to prepare his defense. The district attorney warned me this was standard procedure, especially in cases where the evidence was overwhelming. During this time, I focused on rebuilding. The insurance claim process dragged on for 8 months as they investigated every aspect of the fire to ensure I wasn't involved. Standard procedure, they said, but incredibly frustrating when you're the victim. I had to provide years of financial records, undergo multiple interviews, and navigate endless paperwork. As for the house, the partition action took 4 months to work through the courts. My parents fought it, of course, claiming hardship and trying to delay, but the judge ultimately ruled in my favor. The house had to be sold, and the proceeds split between Blake and me. Given Blake's incarceration, his share went into a trust managed by the court until the criminal case concluded. My parents were forced to move out of the house they'd lived in for decades, the house where I'd grown up feeling like a second-class citizen. They had to downsize significantly. I felt no satisfaction seeing the moving trucks, just a strange sense of closure. The house sold 5 months after the fire for $500,000. My half, $250,000, was released to me immediately. Blake's half remained in escrow, pending the outcome of his case as potential restitution for the arson damages. Throughout this period, Camila had the baby, a boy they named Tyler. I never met him. My parents sent me pictures with passive-aggressive captions, like "your nephew you refuse to acknowledge and family you're turning your back on." I deleted them all without responding. The financial aftermath of the fire was brutal. While waiting for the insurance payout, I had to dip into my savings to help some of my employees who were struggling. Marcel turned down offers from other restaurants, staying loyal as we planned our comeback. I promised him a stake in the new place when we rebuilt. Finally, 11 months after the fire, Blake's trial date arrived. By then, Troy had already accepted a plea deal for 3 years in exchange for his testimony. The trial itself was surprisingly brief, just 4 days. The evidence was overwhelming: the security footage, the gas station receipts, the text messages, Troy's testimony, and the forensic evidence from the fire scene. I testified on the second day, recounting the family gathering, Blake's threats, and the fight at the restaurant. Blake's attorney tried to paint it as a family squabble blown out of proportion, suggesting Blake never intended to actually burn down the restaurant, just scare me. The jury didn't buy it. After just 6 hours of deliberation, they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts. Blake was sentenced to 8 years in prison for arson and related charges, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The judge also ordered him to pay restitution for damages not covered by insurance, approximately $150,000, which would come from his share of the house proceeds. As the bailiff led Blake away, he looked back at me with pure hatred. My parents sat in the row behind him, my mother sobbing into her hands, my father staring straight ahead with a blank expression. They didn't acknowledge me at all. The day after the sentencing, I got a text from my mother asking me to meet. I agreed. When I arrived, they were already seated at a corner table. My mother's eyes were red and swollen. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years. "You got what you wanted," my father said as soon as I sat down. "Are you happy now?" I didn't take the bait. I didn't want any of this. "Blake made his choices 8 years," my mother whispered, her voice breaking. "Our son will be in prison for 8 years because you couldn't forgive him." "Forgive him?" I shook my head in disbelief. He committed arson. He destroyed my business. What did you expect would happen? We expected you to be a brother, my father hissed, leaning across the table. You could have asked for leniency. You could have told the judge it was just a family dispute. It wasn't just a family dispute, I said, keeping my voice level. He committed a serious crime. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. But he's still your brother, your flesh and blood. And that's supposed to excuse everything? I asked. We're done with you, my father said, his voice trembling with rage. You're no son of mine. As far as we're concerned. We only have one child now. And he's in prison, I replied, turning to leave. Maybe visit him once in a while. He'll need all the support he can get. My mother's voice followed me to the door. Don't ever contact us again. You've ruined this family. I walked out without looking back, feeling a strange sense of relief. The last ties had been cut. 2 weeks after the sentencing, the insurance company finally released the full payout, $230,000 for the building and equipment, $45,000 for business interruption, and $25,000 for inventory loss. Combined with my half of the house sale, I now had $550,000 to rebuild. Rebuilding the restaurant took time. Finding a suitable new location took 3 months. I settled on a spot in the River Market area, more expensive, but with better foot traffic and visibility. Getting permits and approvals took another 2 months. Construction and renovations lasted 6 months. Throughout this process, I stayed in touch with my former employees, offering them advances and helping them find temporary work, promising their jobs back once we reopened. Marcel stuck with me the entire time. He helped design the new kitchen, tested menu items at pop-up events we ran to keep our name in the community, and never once wavered in his commitment to our vision. I hired a new general manager with experience turning around struggling restaurants, a guy named Derek, who'd worked for some major chains before wanting something more personal. He brought in a team of servers he'd worked with before, people he trusted to provide top-notch service. The new location cost more but offered better visibility and parking. The previous tenant had been a failed gastropub, so the kitchen infrastructure was already in place, saving us significant renovation costs. I negotiated a lease with the option to buy after 5 years, thinking long-term despite everything that had happened. During the rebuild, I got approached by 3 different investors who'd heard about my story. They offered capital in exchange for equity. I turned them all down. After what happened with Blake, I wasn't about to give up any control of my business, no matter how attractive the offers seemed. 18 months after the fire, our new restaurant finally opened, bigger, better designed, and in a more prominent location. We upgraded everything: better kitchen equipment, a custom wood-fired grill, a real bar with craft cocktails, and a private dining room for events. Marcel created a menu that blended his New Orleans training with Kansas City flavors, elevated comfort food that people couldn't get enough of. Opening night was beyond anything I could have imagined. Every table booked, a line out the door, and a wait list stretching 2 weeks out. Social media exploded with food pics and positive reviews. As I moved through the dining room greeting guests, Detective Reynolds arrived with her husband. "Thought you might like an update," she said, after I seated them at our best table. "Your brother's appeal was denied last week. And I heard your parents had to sell their car to make rent. Apparently, they spent everything they had on Blake's legal defense." I nodded, feeling no satisfaction but no sympathy either. "Thank you for letting me know. Dinner's on the house tonight." As I continued making rounds, I chatted with a table of regulars from the old place. They'd been among the first to book when we announced the reopening. One of them raised his glass and said, "To coming back stronger." The rest of the dining room, overhearing, joined in the toast. I had to step into the kitchen for a minute to compose myself. That night, we did $15,000 in sales, more than double our best night at the old location. By the 3rd month, we were turning a consistent profit and had to start a waiting list for reservations on weekends. I offered Marcel a 15% stake in the business, which he accepted with a firm handshake. Derek got 5%, with the option for more based on performance. Those decisions weren't just smart business moves. They were about building a team that was invested in our success. A year after reopening, I received a letter from Camila. She explained that she and Blake had broken up while he was in prison, and she was raising their son alone. She apologized for her role in the family drama and asked if I would consider meeting my nephew. I haven't decided on that yet. My relationship with my parents remains non-existent. They send cards on my birthday and Christmas, usually with guilt-laden messages about family and forgiveness. I don't respond. Meanwhile, the restaurant continues to thrive. We've expanded to offer lunch service, hired 3 more chefs to work under Marcel, and are considering opening a second location across town. The fire was meant to destroy everything I built, but instead it forced me to rebuild something better. Later, after the last customers had gone and the staff was finishing cleanup, Marcel brought out drinks. To rising from the ashes, he said, pouring. We clinked glasses, and I looked around at my new restaurant, thriving despite everything Blake had tried to destroy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's moving forward and succeeding while they stay stuck in the mess they created.